So part of what inspired me to go to the Met Museum today, which I haven't been to in many years, was close to a decade ago. I was in Athens and I went to the vaunted archaeological museum, and there I discovered, having come from the Cyclades, I discovered the idols, figurines, whatever you want to call them, of the extraordinarily ancient Cycladic civilization, which predates classical antiquity as we know it. You know, the Parthenon, Zeus, Apollo, Aphrodite, Athena, all that. You know, the Temple of Poseidon and all those kind of things. By some 2,000 years, the art of and the civilization of the Cyclades to this day is extremely enigmatic. And that's why I'm on a mission to go to the Met and see the galleries that have all of the Cycladic art. And we should be there in just a couple of minutes. This is the part of New York that I love, and when I leave here I'll miss just this tree-lined street on the Upper East Side. Look at how gorgeous this random approach to the museum is. This is one of those days where, despite everything that's happened in the last several years, I still feel like I love the city. Part of why the small, modest remnants of the Cycladic civilization fascinate me so much is that, you know, I'd been going to the Cyclades since the late 90s. And I'd always gone to what I'll call the principal tourist islands of Ios, Thera, commonly known as Santorini, Paros, and Naxos. And I never really knew, beyond the nightlife and the beaches, what the true history of these islands was. You know, because the thing is that the Cyclades, they don't have the Corinthian or Doric monuments that you find largely in mainland Greece, in Attica and Peloponnesia and so forth. You know, the Cycladic civilization doesn't have the crowd symbols of antiquity like the Parthenon at the Acropolis or the Temple of Poseidon at Cape Sunion in Attica. The Cycladic figurines, idols, deities, you know, whatever they turn out to be, nobody's really quite sure. We still, to this day, after researching them for so much of the 20th century, still don't really know exactly who these people were. What did these idols or figurines actually represent? Were they gods? Were they merely decorative pieces for wealthy traders' homes? It's really uncertain, and I've read a decent bit of research on their origins, and because they don't correspond artistically, as we will hopefully see in the museum, they don't correspond to anything that we connote with Greece, or at least the Greece that we think we know. Aha. Just as I remember it, here are the bike racks. I don't know if these are for the public or employees, but here we go. Sweet. Huh. Fits like a glove. Little did I know there was a parking garage entrance. The Greece we know as Hellenistic or Hellenism. For example, if you look at the map here, right, you have Corinth with Sparta, you have Athens, but here you have the Cyclades. They're not even labeled. You have Troy, Asia Minor, which is modern day Anatolia or Turkey, the Turkish nation state. And you have Cyprus down here, and so forth. If you look at the fine detail and craftsmanship of Hellenistic art, you can see representations of man, woman, And in this case, beast, scenes of violence, scenes of festivals, and all kinds of things. And the human representation is it's much more, I guess, modern than the people that predated this era in the classical age. So these are all sort of things we can understand. They're not terribly abstract. So now we're going to make the transition some 2,000 years previously to the early Bronze Age, where we're going to go from the Hellenism that, you know, if you're into Greek history or the ancient world or the Eastern Mediterranean or the origin of the Western world, you know, it's all too familiar. And here we approach the Cycladic civilization. And just look how markedly different this is. Artistically, stylistically, these two things have nothing in common. So here we have these figures. Now, the key thing of the figures is that especially the female figurines or idols, they always have their arms crossed as if to protect their bellies. This may mean that they represent what is known as the Earth Mother Goddess, which is the sort of a maternal deity that all early peoples in the Cyclades worshipped. And as you'll see, this figure has it too. It's actually, if you look at these statues, it all goes across all different periods. And these appear to mostly be from the early Cycladic II period. But I just love, you know, I love how simple and kind of straight to the point these are. I like how uncomplicated they are. Now, I would imagine that in the Cyclades, on islands like Naxos and Paros, and most importantly, the island of Keros, which is south of Naxos, where many of these figures were actually excavated in the 20th century, and actually even as recently as like 2018 and 2019. These figures just represent something much older. You know, one glaring aspect that separates Cycladic civilization from the Hellenistic civilization that would follow it after the end of the Bronze Age and the onset of the Classical Age is that, as far as we know, as far as I've read, the Cycladic people, whoever they were, the people of Naxos, Paros, Ios, and Keros, and so forth, they didn't leave any written record behind, which makes them very, very different than the Greeks of the classical world. And this, I think, makes them, you know, so darn mysterious. You know, we don't know, for example, it's thought that these are fertility idols, but we don't really know that. Now, a lot of these figurines were actually found in graves on the island of Naxos, which is sort of I would say it's in the heart of like the central Cyclades. But it just, it's really not known, because they didn't leave any kind of texts, any kind of, as far as I know, any sort of written inscriptions. And we basically just have these idols and these vessels to go on. And the vessels are, I mean, this one is somewhat elaborate, but look how simple these are compared to the Hellenistic vessels that, you know, we passed through in the other gallery. And another thing that should be noted is that although you know, part of why these look so simple today is that they are just white marble. However, in the ancient world, these were actually painted, and there have been fragments of them that have been found on sites, I believe particularly in Naxos, where they were actually painted with various bright colors. But over thousands upon thousands of years, you know, most of the colors have washed off. But look, if you look at some of the vessels, I would say pottery, except these are made out of single pieces of marble. But you can see their remnants of accents of color. One of the sort of tragedies of trying to understand the Cycladic culture or civilization is that so many of these artifacts have a very uncertain provenance. Of course, we all know they were from the Cyclades Islands, but so many of them came from looting in the 1950s after the conclusion of the Greek Civil War, which itself followed the end of the Second World War. So there's so much about these statues and you know, vases and things and little sort of amphora-esque objects that we just don't know about because they were looted. They ended up in the hands of private collectors. They later some of those collections later were donated to museums. So if you read a lot of the descriptions here at the Met, it's not like they don't say, oh, this was excavated on Keros, or this was excavated on Syros or Naxos, you know, in 1960 this or 1970 that. They don't really say anything that specific, and it's part of the reason why so much isn't known about them. Now, part of what drove me, or should I say rode me and ferried me to come here today was not just interested in the civilization itself, of course. I mean, that's thrilling as it is. But there's a mystery here, which is that this figure right here, which is very different than all the rest, this is the man with a harp. Now, if you notice, it is in absolutely pristine condition. It has no obvious cracks, dents, blemishes, scratches. Now, I think the world's foremost expert on the Cycladic civilization is a professor at the University of Cambridge in England named Colin Renfrew. And Professor Renfrew insists that this male harpist here in the Met Museum in New York City is actually a forgery, a fake. And this has been a very, very heated topic here at the museum because the museum's curators insist that the harpist is genuine. But if you look at the condition, just the wear and tear and the imperfections of a lot of the other pieces, the harpist just stands out in how exquisite it is. It seems like it's just too good. Now, there is research that this was actually made in 1947 as quite simply a forgery, which happens in the art world, and it can even get the best of curators, the best of art historians. People can get fooled. You know, something I'm noticing here in galleries 150 and 151 is that look how minimalist the descriptions are. They don't say, for example, like I'm noticing that they don't say which islands or which cemeteries on which islands these idols or figurines or however you want to term these remnants of Cycladic civilization. They don't suggest where they came from. This seems like a very outdated way of displaying archaeology. And even here, like even the description here of Cycladic art and civilization, it leaves a lot out. I mean, it's very basic. And I mean, there's at least a map of the Cyclades there's Naxos, which is where the marble quarries were, and there's Keros, where the sanctuary was. But yeah, it's kind of it's kind of more mysterious in that they don't explain much, which kind of gives, you know, the case for the harp player barely has a leg to stand on, or shall I say, a chair to sit down in. In terms of, you know, provenance and history of the Cyclades, the only things we can really be certain of are the excavations that were done, you know, with modern methods and dating techniques, and ones that were actually done, you know, meticulously by noted archaeologists and historians, where everything was marked, and, you know, things were dated, and, you know, all that kind of, you know, specificity. But here at the Met, as far as the figurines that I observed, I didn't see anything specific, which, I mean, is very interesting. Now, I'm not trying to be a naysayer per se. I'm glad that I have access to Cycladic art in New York City. It would just be nice to know where exactly it came from and how it got here.
You don't need no spec.
Well, whatever some of my issues are with how the collection was labeled, or if one of the principal pieces in the collection was actually a mid-20th century forgery, what a great excuse to come into the city. It's a glorious summer day. It's not too hot. It's just like, this was just an awesome reason to come from Queens or Brooklyn into Manhattan. And sometimes you need that. What's interesting to me is that this was all inspired by me thinking about a trip to the Archaeology Museum in Athens, where I learned about Cycladic figurines, statues, statuettes, deities, fertility goddesses, whatever it turns out they were, which maybe we'll never know. And I think, you know, part of the difficulty of history is being able to accept the things that we do not know and that, you know, we perhaps can't know, and just being able to be okay with that. You know, am I certain that the male-seated harpist is a forgery? No, of course not. I'm not an art appraiser or anything of the sort, much less a trained archaeologist. I took but one archaeology class in university. But I do know that there's a story there. I'm here outside the famed Upper East Side auction house Sotheby's on York Avenue in Manhattan, where in recent years a Cycladic Mother Earth goddess, or so we think, although we actually don't know what these idols are, was sold for over $1 million. There's been a lot of interest in recent decades among the billionaire class into Cycladic art, in part due to its mystery, its minimalism, and its sheer beauty and rarity. And I think the fact that we don't know the exact history of these figures makes them more attractive to buyers. And there's an entire illicit art market around the buying, selling, and trade of Cycladic figures from the early Bronze Age. For the last piece of the story, I'm outside Christie's auction house here at Rockefeller Center on 49th Street in Midtown Manhattan. I'd read a piece that was published in 2022 in the Greek City Times while I was researching basically what happens to rare pieces of Cycladic art that aren't in museums. And it was here at this auction house in 2010 that a Cycladic goddess figure, or purported / assumed goddess figure, was sold for a record-breaking almost $17 million to a secretive collector for their private collection or estate, out of reach of the public and out of reach of science. Now, from the piece that I read, there were no details on the provenance or excavation of this goddess deity. And therefore, basically, if it predated 1965, it was essentially looted, probably in either the 1940s, 1950s, or maybe very early 1960s. And you know, you might say to yourself, well, okay, somebody took a piece of rock out of the ground on an obscure island on the other side of the world. What does that really mean? There are a lot of bad things happening in the world today, which is certainly true. But the thing is, with every piece of art like this that is stolen, you are breaking down what little record we have of a textless civilization that predated Hellenism in early Bronze Age Greece. And this is important not just to the history of the evolution of Greece's various civilizations over time, but also just to the world, because if you think about Greece's contribution to the evolution of human society from, you know, what went after the Bronze Age, we got into the Classical Age and Hellenism, and then, you know, which later led to the Roman period, which led to Byzantium. And I mean, if you think about it, the Cycladic civilization is probably a building block of what would come later. And the fact that it's just being sold privately here in New York City with no oversight, I mean, that's a pretty bad deal for humanity. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know it's been a while since I've put out a full format vlog, but if you'd like to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe. And I intend to start vlogging a bit more aggressively in the very near future. I plan to be leaving the United States. Thanks again. See you guys in the next one. Bye.